if you think that the era of steampunk was invented by the science fiction writers of the 20th century, then you are probably mistaken. Of course, the cars and ships created by the imagination of artists look fantastic, but the little-known ships of the 19th century looked no less fantastic today. In the 19th century, the echo of the Napoleonic Wars reached America. The British, caught in a naval blockade, tried to interfere with trade between the United States and France. British warships captured American merchant sailboats bound for Europe. All this led to the Anglo-American War of 1812. The naval blockade of England, off the coast of the United States, was the impetus for the invention of new ships, sailing clippers. Their main task was to break the blockade and quickly escape from the pursuit of the hulking British cruisers. Baltimore shipyards began to build new light and maneuverable ships. That's how the first T-clippers appeared. True, they began to be called T-houses much later. Initially, sailing clippers belonged to military vessels. Unlike the usual sailing ships of the time, T-clippers were equipped with a large number of sails. Moreover, both straight sails were combined here, allowing to develop speed with a fair wind, and oblique sails which helped to maneuver in oncoming gusts. As a result, the new type of sailboat could move in any weather and wind direction. In addition, T-clippers were equipped with winches, cables, and other mechanical devices that made it easier to work with sails. As a result, the number of sailors on board the ship has significantly decreased. To increase the speed, the hull underwent a major modernization. It has become much longer. The ratio of length to width is 6:1, although most sailboats of that time, it did not exceed 4:1. The hull outline was made sharp, which allowed the clippers to cut off the tops of the waves and go even faster. It is because of this that they were called clippers in English cutting. As a result, sailing clippers could reach a speed of 37 kilometers per hour, against 11 kilometers per hour for standard ships of that time. Sailing clippers performed well during the Anglo-American War. But the fighting was over, and something had to be done with the built fleet. Enterprising Americans reoriented new ships for merchant ships, and began delivering cargo along one of the most profitable routes of that time. From Asia to Europe, the tea drinking tradition, which is gaining popularity in Britain, and the problem with the delivery of tea, played into their hands. Merchant ships of that time traveled from China to Europe for 6 to 12 months. During this time, the tea leaves in the hold were damp and covered with mold. This is where sailing clippers came in handy. The same route across the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic and then to England, these high-speed vessels did in 3 months. Tea leaves just reached the right condition, and in perfect condition, fell on the tables of wealthy Britons. In addition to tea flights from China to Europe, the British found another use for a tea clipper. According to Chinese laws, Europeans could not forget their usual goods in China, and then they began to illegally supply opium to China. They managed to sell about 2,000 tons of opium a year. Tea clippers were used for this, as they were the best way to get away from the chase. The popularity of tea clippers also quickly faded away as it arose. Since 1860s, steamships began to plow the sea. If at first they were inferior to tea clippers in terms of carrying capacity and speed, then soon industrial progress allowed them to equalize their capabilities. Steamships also learned to travel the distance from China to Britain in 80 days. And unlike sailboats, they did not depend on weather conditions and wind. The steamers were very stable transport, and stayed at the destination port according to the schedule. The final blow for the tea clippers was the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 year. Sailing ships could not maneuver in this narrow passage, and for steamers it was not difficult. As a result, steamships further reduced the time of cargo delivery from Asia to Europe, and became the main sea transport in the world. In general, if we follow the versions of the official history, nothing unusual shipbuilding of the 19th century did not happen. High-speed sailboats were replaced by steamboats, and in the middle of the 19th century, a massive conversion of sailboats into steam vessels began. The wooden case was untied in half, A wooden insert was made with a mechanical installation, with a capacity of 400 to 800 horsepower. At the same time, the weight load only improved. Heavy boilers and machines were located along the waterline, and there was no need to receive ballast, the weight of which sometimes reached hundreds of tons on sailboats. We see the normal evolution of sailboats, steamships, without any fantastic technologies. But Vince cigar steamers are very much knocked out of this harmonious historical theory. And they were called cigars, not because they transported cigars from Cuba, but because of their cigar-shaped body. American inventor Ross Winans built the first of his wonderful ships, the Ferry Bay Baltimore, in 1858 year. Newspapers of that time wrote that this ship would open a new era of naval architecture. Not only did she have no keel and masts, this ship didn't even have a deck. Instead, there was a flattened space about 5 meters long, to which 4 sofas were attached. The strangest feature of this ship was the ring-shaped propeller that surrounded the waist of the ship. An amazing project. Sailboats also transport tea across the Indian Ocean, and here some inventor offers a completely different concept of ships. How could such an idea have appeared in the middle of the 19th century? Ross Vince was born in 1796 year in a family of horse breeders in Vernon, New Jersey. In 1828 year, he developed a friction wheel with external bearings, the appearance of which became a distinctive pattern of railway wheels for 100 years. At the end of 1820s, he entered the service as an engineer for the Ross Vince Railway Company, participated in the improvement of locomotive coal furnaces. He also soon became a co-owner of a company producing engines for steam locomotives. His firm sold about 300 engines for 26 American railroads. And naturally, a man named Ross must have something to do with Russia. In the middle of the 19th century, a delegation from Tsarist Russia came to America and concluded an agreement with Ross Winans on the construction of an imperial railway from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Winans sent his 2 sons to Russia to implement this project. He sold a huge amount of railway equipment to Russia, almost as much as he delivered to American railroads. In the mid-19th century, Winans and his son Thomas designed and built a series of spindle-shaped ships, commonly referred to as cigar ships. The first one was built in 1858 year and had a unique propeller around the middle part of the ship, enclosed in a casing. This propeller was driven by steam engines located in each section of the ship. The idea was to allow the ship to develop greater speed by reducing the drag of the new hull shape. This ship has never been subjected to serious sea trials. Its width, 4.5 meters, 30 meters long, 4 high-pressure steam engines were installed on it. In January 1859, Ross tested a ship at a speed of 12 miles per hour. Then, he rebuilt and lengthened the hull of the ship to 70 meters and went on it to England for further tests. After the outbreak of the American Civil War of 1861, Winans and his son sent their enterprises to England and to Russia. Several whitefish ships were built in St. Petersburg. In 1861 year, Ross Vince presented to the Russian government a project called combat vehicles on the principle of a spindle. The Winans cigar boat was launched into the Neva River, then it passed the Gulf of Athens, where further tests were carried out. The Russian Shipbuilding Technical Committee did not approve the purchase of cigar boats. Vince then tried to sell his project to the United States government, but was also refused. Another cigar ship was built in Gore, France. Vince then built a 4th cigar ship in England and used it as a personal yacht. For some reason, he very much wanted to register it in the Imperial Yacht Club of St. Petersburg. Here he gets rejected again. Here we have a very strange story emerging. A man with a very sonorous name grew up, receives a huge contract from the Tsarist government for the construction of railways in Russia. It was around this time that the United States and Tsarist Russia had very close, friendly ties, and the government of these countries calls this friendship ancient, despite the fact that the United States is a very young country. I will tell you about this ancient friendship in the next video. There was this fantastic project of whitefish ships that did not pass full-fledged sea trials, but were able to cross the Atlantic Ocean. The most interesting whitefish-shaped boat of 1858th year of construction, with its annular propeller in the center of the hull. The very design of this propeller suggests that this ship was designed to move in an underwater position. Because, in the surface position, this propeller will be ineffective. In the surface position, this screw will give less than 30% of its possible thrust. We see an abandoned submarine with a unique screw, which they tried to use as an ordinary surface ship, but because of the design of the ring screw, nothing came of it, so in the future, the middle screw was not used, and a different type of screw was installed in the bow of the boat, and only after that, the boat was able to move normally in the surface position. Also, ordinary steam engines and chimneys were installed in this ancient submarine. There is even an engraving where sails were installed on such a boat. In my opinion, this is the most striking example of how the remnants of ancient equipment are used by the new population to the best of their abilities. I have photos of cigar ships that evoke only one association. These are abandoned submarines. The natives found them and tried to adapt them for their tasks. Here is another example of incomprehensible technologies of the 19th century, a roller ship. The first attempt to create this unusual ship was made in the early 1880s by Robert Fryer. This ship consisted of triangular-shaped three-row wheels, over which a flat deck was installed. The photograph of this ship has not been preserved, there are only drawings from the patent. It can be seen that the ship was driven by a steam engine, and it could also move along special three-track rails. The ship cost £14,000 to build, which is quite a lot of money for the end of the 19th century. Before building the ship, Robert Fryer spent 12 years experimenting with a model of this unusual ship. Of course, it's a very strange design, and why should the ship be able to move along the rails? The next attempt to create a roller ship was made in the 90s of the 19th century. French was invented by Ernest Bazin, having spent about 5 years on several different models, differing in the location of the configuration of the mushroom screw and the search for the optimal shape. He developed a general concept and started developing a full-fledged vessel. Bazin then found investors to implement his project. The ship was built at the factory in St. Denis and launched on the 19th of August 1896 year. Bazin's idea was to minimize the size of the wetted surfaces of the ship. To this end, the main body of the ship was raised above the surface with the help of 6 huge float wheels. Due to the reduction of resistance with the water surface, the vessel, according to the calculations of the inventor, could move at a sufficiently high speed, 40 knots an hour, which was twice the speed of an ordinary steamer. It was also predicted to reduce fuel consumption. According to Bazin's calculations, such a vessel would need only 800 tons of coal to cross the Atlantic. An ordinary steamer spent 3,000 tons of coal on such a route. The total length of the first built Bazin ship is 40 meters, 12 meters wide. The platform's own height is 1.5 meters, the weight is 280 tons. At normal load, the wheel went into the water to a depth of 3.5 meters, so that the deck remained about 4 meters above the water surface. 3 pairs of air-filled wheels were supposed to take the entire mass of the vessel and hold the hull above the surface. The ship was equipped with 4 engines. 3 with a capacity of 50 horsepower and 1 with a capacity of 500 horsepower. Already the first tests showed that the use of 6 float wheels really helps to keep the hull of the vessel at a great distance from the water, but at the same time, hidden design flaws were revealed. The engine power was insufficient to rotate the huge float wheels. The wheels were just stuck in the water. Bazin wanted to improve his brainchild equip it with more powerful engines, but he did not have time. He died on January 21, 1898. It seems to be an unremarkable story of another self-taught inventor who came up with an unviable project with ridiculous wheel floats. But here everything is not as simple as it seems at first glance. Look at this tough experience that girds the wheels. And now let's go back to the project of Engineer Frere. Here we see the same experience, and the ship could move on rails. It looks like these two projects were designed to work in a different world from ours. These ships were created for the world, most of which is hidden under a meter layer of water, which could unexpectedly come and go as a result of global tides. Just imagine that in the 19th century, the vast territories of our continents were hidden under a small layer of water about a meter deep. Conventional ships are not suitable for these depths. They have a very low landing, they just immediately run aground. But the ships, or better to call them the moving platform of Frere and Bazin, are ideal for these purposes. In dry places, they could move along rails, and with the help of Poplukev wheels, they could cross flooded lowlands. Perhaps the water was still standing on huge territories until the middle of the 19th century. Then the water slowly left, leaving these unusual platform ships. They tried to adapt them to new conditions, to transport goods across the seas, but nothing came of it. These projects were created for shallow waters from wetlands, not for oceans. And these are not the only projects of shallow water ships. If we recall the projects of Admiral Popov and his Popovka or Monitor, they were also ideally suited for a semi-submerged shallow water world. So I think that back in the 19th century, huge territories were hidden by a thin layer of water, and at first glance, very strange ships were created for these shallow waters. That's it. Look, watch my channel.